In the beginning of time, the first creatures to set foot upon the lands were those of fire and ice. The fire and ice creatures were able to coexist for a period of time, until the two leaders decided that they would never get along. With this, they decided to settle their differences. Disagreements were born, war raged on, and blood was shed. The war seemed endless, with massive casualties on each side. With the war waging on for more than 50 years, at the end of the conflict, there were no winners, only ash that filled the world. Their constant onslaught towards each other brought about a millennium of floating debris within the atmosphere, creating the Great Age of Ash. With their never-ending war, it sparked a new life amongst the world. Meet Jack, a human child born in the kingdom of Hugo. Jack lived a harsh life with many people in his village, succumbing to a plague known as ash fever. But that wasn't the only hardship the village faced. Human life wasn't alone in what rose from the Great Fire and Ice War. Orcs appeared, and they were not peaceful. They began to siege the village. Wielding strange staffs of power, the humans had no clue where these beings came from. Successfully fending off the orcs, the humans were victorious, but not without many casualties and losses. The humans had never seen such ferocity before, let alone a orc. They knew they had to prepare for what was to come, but so did Jack. At the ripe age of 10, Jack began his early training starting with small animals. He went for rabbits, chickens, and eventually wolves. But Jack knew this was not enough to defeat the orcs, so he decided to go after the legendary dire bear. The dire bear was much different from its fellow bears. This bear was much bigger and much more ferocious than the others. Jack did not care for these facts, so he set off to find the bear, traversing plane to plane in hopes of coming across the bear. For traveling for what felt like years, young Jack was beginning to believe that the dire bear was a myth. Jack decided to not give up as he already come so far, finally meeting the bear, and when he did, they instantly got into a brutal fight. The bear's size was overwhelming, but Jack did not care. They were going blow for blow in what seemed to be an even match. At some point in the battle, Jack gained an advantage over the bear, finally slaying the legendary dire bear and letting out a sigh of relief. Jack returns home to give his people the news of his achievement. The news spreads all over the kingdom, and they all give him the nickname, Jack the Bear Slayer. Time passes, and Jack reaches adulthood with his reputation instantly giving him the title of a squad leader. With now being able to command a platoon of soldiers, Jack leads them into training to better their chances at winning. Anxious for the war, Jack and his platoon begin to board the ships and set sail to the land of the mysterious orcs. Landing at the shore of the orcs' village, Jack and his platoon begin to siege and attack whatever they can. Using the staffs they recovered off the orcs, they raise destruction and leave nothing behind in their path. Jack steps away from his platoon to fight on his own, using the hatred from when he attacks his homeland. Jack slices and cuts through every orc he sees, even targeting small children. Jack, blinded in his rage, does not realize that more than half of his comrades have fallen. With a looming presence over the land, mysterious strikes of lightning begin to appear. It felt as something was getting closer and closer. With approaching steps, the king of the orcs appeared. It seemed as when the king started to approach Jack, the other orcs had to retreat, as if they were only allowed to spectate the fight. In an instant, they were at it. Jack felt the king's energy and knew this would be much harder than the dire bear. With each swing of his sword was a struggle for his life. It got to a point that every time the two beings clashed, that it shook the entire world, shifting the entire landscape. Volcanoes began to form. Villages started to collapse, and the rise of the volcanoes began to raise the temperature of the entire globe, setting everything ablaze. With the war still ongoing, the anger from the war and rising temperatures began to fuse with the Age of Ash, painting the atmosphere red. transforming the world into an age of rage. Everyone was caught in awe when looking at how their world had changed so suddenly. Jack decided it was time to go back home. With this, the kingdoms came to an agreement, and peace was made between the two, and all seemed to be perfect until it arrived. A mysterious object appears out of nowhere, seemingly with no origin, and seems to be pulsating a red aura. The creatures of this world begin to feel weird. To be continued.